Well, Trump's not going to get elected.
Donald Trump wins the presidency.
And Brexit ain't going to happen.
It is done. We are out, officially out of the European Union.
Russia's not going to invade Ukraine.
It was unprovoked, but this is what Russian President Vladimir Putin unleashed on Ukraine.
And Israel's not going to invade Gaza. And now Iran's not going to fire rockets directly into Israel.
Iran launched more than 300 cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and drones toward Israel.
Each one of these things seemed like impossibilities before, but guess what? One by one, they all happened over the past few years. And the thing is, it keeps escalating. It's bigger and bigger. And we've got memory recency issues. We also get deadened to these things because they keep occurring and we forget. But if you string these things together, you'll understand there's some nastiness happening in the world and it ain't slowing down. Today I'm here in the beautiful city of Bellevue, Washington, up by where Seattle is, and you know, the weather's so freaking nice out today, it'd be a sin to do a recording indoors. So here we are outdoors. Come take a walk with me and we talk about some pretty important stuff. Now here's the deal, we're talking about a factory reset that is about to happen on a global scale. And I know often we talk about factory resetting yourself, but if you zoom out into what's really happening in the world, you'll see that there's actually a factory reset that's about to happen across multiple countries and continents. And this is something that spans across multiple areas: financial, geopolitical, and even digital. This is not a video about conspiracy theories. We're not going to be talking about the WEF or the World Economic Forum and the dude running it who's sick. Nor are we going to talk about the Bilderbergs or the Freemasons or anything like that. We're just going to be talking about things that are factual events that are happening and unfolding in front of our eyes and ears, and that you can very well see yourself. So we got to take a hard look about what's been happening recently and try to get rid of memory recency and a customization to crazier and crazier events happening, where we kind of just talk it away, right? And string them together to see in reality what the heck is really going on, because time's running out. And if you look at just the geopolitical situation with the most recent bombing of Iran by Israel, even though it was a very limited strike, the rules of the game have changed. So if often we talk about questioning the defaults, not taking things for granted, and we're going to look at these three different areas with that principle in mind. The first one being up is the financial system. Now, I've talked about the financial system and the Great Depression, or the coming Greater Depression, and how cycles occur, because we have generational amnesia, because basically nobody lives over 100 years old, and we forget and repeat the same mistakes we've made over time. And if you look at the setup now, we're basically at the end of a long-term debt cycle, where debt has been accumulated as a way to grow, and that debt has shifted first from the private area to the public sector. And the private debt that blew up on us the last time was in 07, 08. But that has been shifted with all the money printing into sovereign debt, or at the country level. And now we've got debt up the wazoo at the nation level, basically. So if you look at the United States, I mean, the trillions of dollars that it is under debt now is not serviceable, because guess what happened when you print a lot of money? You get inflation. And what happens now is, because the inflation has gone up, they had to raise interest rates to take it under control. Otherwise, you'll have runaway inflation or hyperinflation, which is the end game, or one of the two end games. And so they did that, but by doing so, they also raised the amount of money it takes to service the debt. And so basically, the country's running out of money to pay for the interest for all the debt that is accumulated. Obviously, this is not a sustainable setup. So at one point, something's going to have to give. There's really no choice here. You either inflate, risk the situation of a hyperinflation setup, or you don't inflate, and what happens is you default, and you reset the system and clear out all the excesses. Between the two, hyperinflating is always the way that's chosen, because nobody's got the balls to just wipe the system clean. So it doesn't have to get that much more complicated than what I described. It's actually quite simple. And you know what? The funny thing is, this is something that's happened time and again to many, many governments and many, many civilizations, when essentially they just borrow or create money out of thin air to finance stuff that they want to do so that they can get reelected and keep people happy. And that keeps going on and on and on from the Roman times until now. And essentially, the end game is upon us. Now, that is the case with the United States. But as you know, this is a global economy now. And even though we've had a decoupling in a bifurcated world as a result of geopolitics, the financial systems are still tightly interlinked. Or that was the case until recently, because now, if you look at the actions being taken by what's called the BRICS nation, which is essentially led by Russia and China, due to the sanctions that have been imposed on them, they basically created their own setup where they can settle transactions in the global markets for commodities such as oil and energy without having to use a US dollar, which has always been the regime after World War II, what they call Bretton Woods and Bretton Woods II. And so I have a situation where they don't need the US dollar to settle transactions in the global markets for commodities which are essential for functioning. And they just settle it in gold, and sometimes even direct currency to currency transfers that then get transferred into gold, which then the Chinese kind of keep in a vault and store for the other nations. And if you look at what's going on with gold, it's no surprise that it's at all-time highs, basically because the central banks have been accumulating them because they see what's going on and they use it in preparation for what's going to happen, which is, if there is a reset, guess what? They're going to reset it too. The currency that's been around humanity for thousands and thousands of years, which is gold. Now, more recently, there's been a new invention, and what they call the digital equivalent of gold, which we know today as Bitcoin, which is built on blockchain technology. A couple of things about this thing that's super fascinating is, number one, the creator of this blockchain and Bitcoin technology, some individual pen name named Satoshi, actually, we have no idea who this person is. No clue. And in today's world, the year 2024, for somebody to hide their identity that long, and with all the internet sleuthing that's possible, to not have any clue of who this person is quite astounding if you really think through. I don't think there's anything near the shroud of secrecy that has been kept so well compared to the identity of the creator of blockchain and hence Bitcoin. Second thing you should know about Bitcoin is the technology underlying Bitcoin, which is blockchain. So basically the simplest way I can describe this is on the blockchain or in the chain. Basically, once something goes up there, you can't change it. It's what they call immutable, or basically it's static forever, right? It's like in writing forever, nobody can ever change it. And that's one of the things about blockchain that's its value, right? You can't tamper with things. And so in the very first block of the blockchain, whoever created it put in the reason of why blockchain was created. And the way it was done was actually quite interesting. It's a quote from a European news outlet talking about how basically because of the 07-08 financial crisis, the government's been printing money. And they basically said it's that reason the chancellor is a screw up for printing money. And that's why we're creating this new thing called Bitcoin. So if anybody ever asks what the purpose of blockchain is, now you know. So here's the thing. Do I believe in Bitcoin? I do. I think it is potentially the digital version of gold that offers much of the same properties and characteristics and value. Is it gold? It can't. It can't be yet. And it's a simple reason. Not enough time has passed. Whereas gold has been around for thousands of years through many wars and civilizations and collapses and rebuilding and everything, we always keep coming back to it. So we know we're going to keep coming back to it in the future ahead. Bitcoin's been around for a couple of decades. Not even, right? And so hasn't survived the test of time. And so while I do think it could be, I don't know if it is yet. And that's going to be an important thing to talk about a little bit later when we talk about how to prepare for what's going to be coming. Now, these three things are tightly interrelated: the financial and the geopolitical and the digital setups. They're all kind of linked together, and what's going to happen, you'll see, is kind of a self-reinforcing domino effect, if that makes any sense to you. And so what happens is, when faced with basically a binary outcome of a sovereign debt default or hyperinflation and the death of a currency, as I said before, history has shown always choose a ladder, because you can always push it off, right? And the option of war comes into play. And that is a segue into the geopolitical fever that we see these days, the escalation of conflicts in multiple parts of the world. If you think about it, it's not a coincidence that it's also happening at the same time we're ending this long-term debt cycle that we've built up ever since World War II. So I'm at the Bellevue Public Park, and it's beautiful out here, but look at that. It's a huge tree right smack in the middle of the entire park, which is really cool because it centers your focus into this one huge thing, and it's got power, man. That is a big, big tree. Now, wars solve a couple of things for countries that get into the last stages of their financial debt cycle. Number one, it provides a machinery for factories to manufacture war-related components and goods and services. And so what that does is it increases and stimulates economic activity centered around war and the war machine. Now, it's an age-old trade-off, right? You're going to build guns, or you're going to build or make butter. Well, in this case, you're going to make guns. The other thing it lets you do, it actually gives you an out, right? It's literally, if you want to call it, the trigger switch, but it's the red button for the factory reset of the world. And that button is there for them to press. But make no mistake, they're not going to just press that at any old given time. That's the last resort. That's when all of things have failed. And that's when they're going to press that button. And so war is usually the solution to the end game. And what happens, if you look at what happened in World War II, and if you go back hundreds of years, how wars or major global escalations that end up in wars have actually created the new regime that lasts for then another few decades, and so on and so forth until the new cycle starts. And what I'm here to tell you is that the cycle is about to get reset. Look at all the conflicts around the world. These are not new. Middle East, Eastern Europe, even in Asia with the South China Sea and Taiwan, and so on and so forth. These aren't new conflicts. These are things that have been happening for some time. But what you're seeing is a percolation and the escalation in all of these age-old conflicts. And what you have are two main countries in China and Russia on one side, and a coalition of multiple Western countries, including the United States and NATO on the other, with the players in between, such as Brazil, India, and so on and so forth, jockeying for position right now, getting the energy and the supply chain ready, because you cannot have a conflict without the supply chain and energy squared away. And so you see that, right? You see how they're creating the channels and the infrastructure to properly manage that in the event of a war. From the financial system, where the currencies are settled in their own way without a central clearinghouse, which was and has been the US dollar as a reserve currency since the end of World War II. You got two guys in Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin who are running up two countries that are at the head of the other faction. And what's going to happen is that these two folks, they have an agenda, right? They want to leave a legacy. And the thing is, they're both around the same age. They're in their 70s, I believe. And they understand that there's time running out. You know, they can't be doing their world agenda when they're like 80 or 90 years old. So, you know, they've got this window of time of about I don't know, a decade or so, where they got to execute their plan because I mean they're heads of states. They're kind of like dictators, right? They're not going away. Neither one of the two are going away. And so, yeah, they're preparing, right? Because now at the end stage of their lives and careers, it's not about, you know, internally what they're going to do. It's about externally what they're going to do and where they're not going to fulfill their legacies. And in China, it's about Taiwan, right? That's the lost island. And in Russia, well, it's the Soviet bloc that used to. I mean, going back to the Prussian era, the goal of setting up the old Russia again is the thing, right? So then you mix in the situation in the Middle East, which is also a I mean, even older agenda. But here's the thing, the trigger won't be in the areas that you're looking at. They're going to come in areas where we're not expecting the trigger to be. And so an example of that would be the South China Sea and the conflict between China and the Philippines, for example, the United States involved in that. Like that's a potential flare-up, right? That could trigger something, just like the trigger was Hawaii in World War II, kind of out of the way. It's going to be one of these things that's going to trigger it. And when it triggers, everything's going to go and move very quickly because, as I said, they spent many, many years, even decades, preparing carefully for the execution when the time comes. So I got to take a moment here and just enjoy this beauty. I mean, look at this. This is freaking beautiful. Love it. Look at those houses. These houses enjoy such a beautiful view of the harbor here on such a beautiful day. Kind of makes me wish I could stay here longer, but time's going to be coming soon for me to head back to Singapore and then back to Bali. Most recently, we saw the direct escalation and conflict between Israel and Iran. And yeah, it looks like they've kind of de-escalated the situation and everything. But make no mistake, the rules of engagement has shifted up another level. Now we have direct missiles and drones being fired upon each other, launched from each other. And even though nothing severe happened, the Band-Aid has been pulled off, meaning it's not taboo to do this again. And that is a huge escalation in terms of a mindset of what's possible now. It was kind of impossible to do this, and everybody was worried it was going to start World War III, which it hasn't yet. But now that it has happened, it's fair game. It can happen again if somebody does something bad. I mean, all it's going to take is a trigger of some event or something for them to do it again, because guess what? Precedent has been set. So digital is a third component, and it's an accelerator, catalyst that humankind hasn't seen before for both geopolitical and financial cycles. Now, I already talked a little bit about blockchain and Bitcoin, how that's impacting the financial sector. In geopolitics, we're talking about management of people at scale through their data and influencing the choices and decisions that they make. Without going into, again, any conspiracy theories, all we have to do is look at what happened with the COVID situation. Throw out all the theories, right? Just look at how the information was managed or mismanaged, for a better word, and the chaos it caused in many nations around the world. And with the introduction of all the data and now the processing of the data to create artificial or machine intelligence, you can see how that's shifting the war landscape and how that's being used to be weaponized and to take advantage over other countries that don't have machine intelligence. If you look at the warfare that's being waged, you'll see a lot of digital influence in terms of strike zones. There's been reports of Israel using AI to actually map out targets with just a human to just checkbox whether or not to, execute the strike on, all the way to drones. And we are not that far. And I'm very sure that the militaries around the world are testing weaponized autonomous machines, meaning machines that can actually fire weapons. And with automatic targeting system and using AI to determine whether it's a friend or a foe, and based on that, whether or not to shoot and kill. And once we traverse that, and we already have traversed it, we just haven't deployed it yet, that's going to change the game of how we wage war. And so in the geopolitical side, in the weaponization of digital, along with the manipulation of information, and also the management of individual and private information at scale of your behavior, things have really changed. So that brings us to the question of what the heck are we going to do and how do we prepare? And so that takes us to the last part of this little walk we're taking. And I gotta say, man, I've really enjoyed this little stroll I've been taking around the park and the beach here. It's such a beautiful day. So first thing is you must prepare yourself mentally. That's the most important thing. Because if you don't, you're not going to have the wherewithal and the strength to withstand all the stresses that are going to be coming in. And once they start coming, it's going to be fast and furious. And if you're not prepared mentally, you're going to cave in and make irrational or bad decisions at the heat of the moment. Second thing is to reduce the amount of irrational decisions by preparing ahead. And so just like NASA would prepare ahead, they don't want to make rash choices in the event of some issue with the space shuttle or some rockets. You want to do the same with your life when it comes to the situation. So how do you prepare ahead? Well, first thing is prepare ahead financially. And the first thing you want to do is to diversify your income stream. Don't believe that whatever cushy job you have is going to be there forever, because it's not. In fact, I had quite a stable job and I booked out because I didn't want to wait to see what would happen, and then got caught in the crossfire of not knowing what to do and be forced to make an irrational decision. And so you should do the same. You should understand where you could have additional income streams, whether it's through investment decisions you make or creating a new line of work, supplementary line of work, and so on and so forth. But don't just rely on what you're doing now and pretend to believe that that's going to be the only source forever and ever and ever, because let me tell you, it's not. The other thing you need to do is you need to protect your existing assets, whether it be illiquid assets such as houses or other things that are not easy to liquidate into cash or transactional medium. You got to diversify that away, right? And make sure that you get rid of debt, because that's going to blow up, and set up ways to translate things such as cash and illiquid assets into things that are going to hold value once the reset occurs. You want to put it in things such as gold to some degree, and even to Bitcoin, but to a lesser degree, because that one's still not proven, as I said, due to time. But you should move them into these types of assets so that they can carry over once the flip happens and you'll still have access to them. And you want to do it smartly, because there are different countries in the world that are more open to doing that, such as Singapore. When it comes to, let's say, gold, you can come in and out of the country, into the airport, out of the country through the airport, with any amounts of gold, and they're not going to care, because Singapore is a very gold-friendly nation, and for a good reason. See, they're smart. They want to make that one of the benefits of its kind of neutral status, at least in the Asian region, kind of like the Switzerland of Asia. And so they're very friendly to that. And they even have gold vaults that are also protected by international law, where you can store them. And so these are examples of how you can prepare ahead of time and move things around slowly and deliberately, so that when and if the time comes, you're just in execution mode and not thinking mode, because you don't want to be thinking in the heat of the moment. The other thing you want to be preparing for is literally the safety, the physical safety of you and your family. You want to have outs, a mechanism or a way to exit. If you're living in a densely populated city, for example, such as Singapore, or a large metropolis, you want to have a way to get out and a place to get out to. Doesn't have to be the most luxurious place. You don't have to be a billionaire to build some bunker out in New Zealand. You can still have outs, maybe a small little place or a villa somewhere. Personally, I have set up something in Bali so that there's an out in an island that historically doesn't have strategic value from a port of call point of view, nor from a natural resource point of view. So they'll kind of leave you alone. Find these types of places around the world where you can get to and escape the mass populated areas that are huge target centers for activity in the upcoming factory reset of the world. Look, I know this sounds pretty grim and nobody wants to talk about this kind of stuff, but you know, you could keep ignoring this as crazier and crazier things keep happening. I mean, if you want to like ignore it and turn off the news or the internet and pretend things aren't happening, sure, do that and be at risk. But if you even keep half an eye open, you'll see what's going on in the world. You'll see that it's escalating. It's not de-escalating, it's escalating. And if you play the game of trying to desensitize yourself and talk it away, give reasons why it's okay for that to happen, you're going down the wrong path. And that is a path of unpreparedness, shock, and the bad kind of awe when it does occur. So I highly recommend you to think through, open your eyes, think critically, apply FOFTI principles, understand what's going on, don't stick your head into the sand, and actually benefit from the upcoming factory reset. Having said that, thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of the day here in Bellevue. Soak in some sun. And remember, just keep your heads up and your eyes open. Don't fall into the crowd of misinformation and worse, ignorance. Peace out.